In that scenario, the skills that you were learning building this business also really helped you on the Disney side.
When you pursue a side project, it's a win-win, because what's going to happen is your skill growth and your level of learning is going to outpace your peers. So if you then apply those learnings back at your job, you're going to shine, and you're going to be part of that 10% or 1% that gets promoted more frequently than others.
Welcome to the second episode of This is the Way with Artin and Michael. We wanted to launch this podcast to share our experience, insights, and knowledge around everything from career growth to side hustles to ventures, entrepreneurship, and hopefully help pave the way for others who are in the same shoes we were in 10 or 15 years ago. You can consider us your Jedi to guide you on your path. In episode 1, we shared my story, and in this episode, we're going to flip the script and hear about Artin's story. Let me share a little bit about Artin before we get started. Artin is a successful media executive, entrepreneur, and author, and somebody I'm proud to say has been a friend for nearly 20 years. His family migrated to Los Angeles as refugees from war-torn Iran, where it wasn't the best place to raise Christian Armenian kids. Always passionate about the arts, he decided to go to film school and pursue filmmaking. After film school, he spent almost 2 decades at the Walt Disney Company, quickly climbing the ladder to become an executive. He couldn't keep the filmmaker entrepreneur, though, dormant inside him, so while climbing the ladder at Disney, he also pursued several ventures on the side. For one such venture, he raised $4 million and built a company on the side while continuing to climb the ladder. This experience led him to write the Amazon best-selling book, Side Adventure, the playbook to leverage your corporate job, pursue a side venture, and find happiness and fulfillment. And he recently founded the Aspiring Founders Academy, where his mission is to help at least 100,000 less privileged aspiring founders bring their good ideas to life. Jumping into it here. And by the way, if I think I said it, hopefully I said it, I'm Michael Merrill, Artin Nazarian, and here we go. Okay, so Artin, if you would just start off by telling the audience a little bit about your background.
Where should I start? I'll start with kind of saying that, my family moved to the U.S. We were living in Iran. And, growing up in the 80s in Iran with the Iran-Iraq war just wasn't the best place to raise kids, especially being Christians. And now, in the 80s and even now, Iran being this very strict Islamic country. So my parents got us out through a hop in Spain and Madrid, eventually made it to LA. And in LA, kind of being surrounded by the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, that's kind of where my interest in the entertainment industry began. In my childhood, I always used to draw characters, and I was doing a lot of drawing. You can argue that actually my first entrepreneurial venture was selling drawings, because elementary school kids and elementary school and middle school kids would pay me to draw. So I would take orders and I would charge them and I would get money. There was no Venmo, so it was just, cash exchange.
What was the
but it was cool.
What was the going rate back then?
I think I was charging like $1 or $2. It was lunch money. That's basically what it was.
Inflation today, that'd be a $10 drawing, I think.
Exactly. And it was all, fairly well-known cartoon characters that they would want customized in a certain way. So ironically, Disney characters were the most popular orders that I got. And then, fast forward high school, get into film school because I decided, animation is not where I want to be. I want to make movies. So I went to film school. And as you guys had heard in episode 1, that film school experience is where Michael and I connected. And if you remember his story of selling women's shoes to somebody that worked at Disney, and that's how I ended up at Disney too, with Michael. And while at Disney, we were trying to figure out our career path. We didn't want to lose sight of our ambition of being filmmakers. So I think what Michael might not have touched on in his episode was we did a lot of writing. We did a lot of screenwriting. We would spend hours at Starbucks late at night. And we got pretty close at selling a couple of scripts. One of them was where we we found out that Disney was looking for some animated script ideas. We had an idea. It was called Zoo Break. So we pitched it. They asked us to come for a pitch meeting. I didn't think they realized that we were Disney employees at then. So we basically hid our badges, walked into the production office, did the meeting. They liked the idea. They asked for sequel ideas. But eventually it got passed because their research showed that Madagascar was coming out. And even though we thought it was very different, there was nothing similar about Madagascar and our unproduced, titled Zoo Break. The only similarity was the zoo part. Other than that, the whole story was different. But anyway, they passed on it. So we almost caught a break.
The other thing, just, jumping on that one too, I don't know if you remember, but they also shortly thereafter acquired the rights to release a movie called The Wild that was more similar, but The Wild was not very good, unfortunately. So
yeah. And then as, we did some commercial and music video production. And as it got a little harder to figure out how to make our movies, I decided, you know what, technology seems to be pretty hot. Why not? Let's give technology a shot. Both of us had a lot of experience at this point at Disney trying to build systems to streamline operations and anything internally. So we try to apply those skills. So one of the first projects, disaster. Second one, failure. I think it took about 4 or 5 attempts. Eventually, one of them was good enough where an investor actually wrote us a big check. It was in a few $1 million check. So there was a startup on the side while excelling at Disney. And our career paths, Michael and I, were very similar. It's like anytime he got promoted, I was shortly behind. Or it was just like very close to each other. And luckily he was married. I think otherwise there would be some rumors floating around too.
There were rumors.
That wasn't the case. Yeah. So that startup was kind of happening. It was a grind, mornings, working on that. Then around 9 o'clock hitting Disney. Then at night again. And this was like a 7-year effort. I had a team of 25-ish on the side, and then the Disney team, which was a pretty large team as well. Eventually, that got acquired by another startup, and I was itching for something else. Now, by this time, I was, for a very long time, an executive at Disney, kind of following the same timeline path as Michael. And I wanted to do something else on the side. I was itching. I felt like I needed that creative outlets on the side so the corporate politics doesn't drain my creativity.
And that's when you got into stripping?
Yes. And that's kind
one of the best dancers. If you ever get the chance, have Artin perform for you. Amazing.
Yes. So what I did was I started to look at what other problems can I solve with software. And it was this idea called efficient. And it was spelled with a FISH in the middle, because the whole concept was if you want your organization to be efficient, they all need to swim like a school of fish together. I built a prototype, but shortly after, my wife got pregnant. And I knew that there's no way I could be a present dad and do what my schedule was like the previous 6, 7, 8 years. And then that thought of doing something on the side was still, in my head. I always had a bucket list item to write a book. And that's kind of how the book came about. Was, people were asking me to speak, give them advice around how did I do this thing on the side and kind of climbing the ladder. And I wrote the book. And that's kind of a very quick kind of background on how I've dabbled into several things over the last 2 decades of being in the entertainment industry as the main thing, but a lot of side things as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. I want to double click into a couple of things here. One of those, just as you did mention juggling each of them. How did you? I mean, look, because it's no easy feat to. A lot of people just struggle with their job at hand, let alone having their job and literally another full business that you are CEO of, if you will, and driving that and managing a team. How did you do that? What were some of the techniques that you leveraged?
I would say the first thing is habits. Like I had to get down to a routine of waking up in the morning and then have a routine and habit of what to do. And with that came a slight sense of urgency because the team was built, a small team in the US and an offshore development team, Romania and India. And in order for me to keep momentum with the time change, I had to make sure I gave them what they needed. So then the next day when we had our stand-up or any type of meetings, I wasn't the one that was holding things up. So that idea of, I don't want to hold this up, I have to push it forward, was just ingrained in me. So that kind of was the foundation of it. The habits were critical. And then after habits were kind of systems, whether it was finding actual software systems to help manage the projects better, or just personal systems around, so where are we going to save documents, and how are we going to perform meetings, and how are we going to make sure the team collaboration stays, all those together. And then the heart of it was I had an investor's money on my shoulder and I didn't want to disappoint. So I was motivated to make sure that we were successful. So I was, going 100 miles an hour pretty regularly. But because I enjoyed it, it didn't feel like work. I truly enjoyed that process of, the ideation. We validated the idea. We started building the product. And I clearly remember we built a prototype website. And that year, Apple launched the iPhone. And then it was about a year later, the App Store was launched. So very quickly, I was like, oh my God, we got to get mobile. If we're building a platform for the nightclub and bar industry, that's a very mobile group of people. We have to be mobile. So it was like, okay, now how do we build an app? And that constantly wanting to learn and apply was fun, and I really enjoyed it.
I'll admit, at that point, that was when I was kind of like, but we just finished the site, let alone having to now have to go and, in essence, do it not again, but in a way, again, the way that the app side worked. So now, what about on the corporate side, the Disney side? Now, how were you still able to make sure you were keeping things afloat there, especially as you had this thing you were super excited about on the side?
That's a good question. I think leadership becomes critical, and finding the right leadership style to make sure that, one, you're promoting the right talent within your own team, recruiting the right talent within your own team, and then giving them the opportunity to grow and make mistakes. So I was very focused on how can I elevate my team to take on more and be good at it, so I don't have to be burdened with it on nights and weekends. So I had this, underlying motive to make sure that my team was very strong. So I developed a lot of leadership skills and approaches that was focused on team building. And because of my background in sports, and as you can see, Kobe jersey in the back there, I referenced professional athletic coaches to draw influence and inspiration from around how to build high performance teams, that all you need to do is coach. And literally I had a big quote wall in my office, and then I had these signs that said, "I'm not your boss, I'm your coach." Because I wanted to really ingrain in the team's mindset that you guys are the stars. Just, I need to know how I can make you to always perform at the level that you can every day. And that worked out well for me. And the funny byproduct of that is that leadership and, leadership above me, seeing what I had done, it just created more opportunities and more promotions. It was this funny byproduct that I never expected.
One other thing too, just having seen some of the things happen, is a lot of what you were learning when it came to, we'll call it a side hustle now. I mean, it was literally building a company. In fact, you start to wonder which was really the side hustle. But in that scenario, the skills that you were learning building this business also really helped you on the career, however we want to say it, corporate, the Disney side. At the time, because the technology and the things moving forward, I mean, people were talking about building sites, and it's like you'd sit there, you weren't going to show off in any way, but you literally have done things that they were talking about there. And I'm just curious if you speak a little bit to actually that other advantage of you building out, this endeavor on the side.
Yeah, when you pursue something, a side project, it's a win-win no matter what, because what's going to happen is your skill growth and your level of learning is going to outpace your peers. So if you then apply those learnings back at your job, you're going to shine, and you're going to be part of that 10% or 1% that gets promoted more frequently than others. That's not something that I strategically went into knowing. It's when I looked hindsight, I realized, oh my God, yeah, if you just do something on the side where you control what you learn, how you learn it, and then apply it anywhere you want, you don't have to wait and ask permission from a boss to say, hey, I'm interested in a stretch project. And then who knows if you get that? Well, create your own stretch project on the side. And the upside is maybe that stretch project on the side becomes your main source of income. And now you are the boss. And that definitely was a huge win-win. And the other was, like you mentioned, I was doing things kind of a step ahead of what we were doing at Disney. So I always came across as knowing the answer. And people were like, well, how does this guy know the answer? Well, yeah, it's not that I was the smartest person in the room. It was just that I was doing it on the side. So I had the experience and I could speak to it. And they both of those kind of collided together to help me outshine peers and shine a light on me, and more promotions and accolades came my way.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, because I do remember some of the things, like at the time with stuff like Blu-ray, and there was like BD Live at the time, which was this idea of how that stuff interacts with the internet, or there was just digital sell-through and actually how it worked to start looking at how this would be compatible with Apple. And you had been building an app specific to also Apple. So yeah, there were a lot of these different synergies that happened there. I would also say that, my observation was that, because like sometimes people might think, well, if you're spending X amount of hours here and X amount of hours here, then how do you manage that? But I think the other big benefit that starts to happen is you're forced to find better ways to do those things, because now you're like, okay, how do we do it? And you had said, well, you didn't want anybody to ever, like you to be held others up. And there's something, Parkinson's law, I can't remember if I talked about it last time, but ultimately we've managed to fill the time that we have. And that's why somebody who has the same job, if they give themselves 20 hours to do it versus somebody at 40 hours, you figure out a way to do it. And I think that's another important thing that I saw you definitely do. And I think you were a better leader too, because you realized you had to make those moments count. And that's actually sometimes better, because there's leaders who are stuck in those times wishy-washy about how to approach things because they have the time to be. And you just had to, it almost forced you to be a better, faster decision maker, which I think.
Yeah, it forced me to be very decisive.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't waste time with large group meetings to come to a decision that instinctively I knew was right. And all I had to do was reference a few data points to back up my intuition. And 8 out of 10 times I was right. So I just was very decisive, because I didn't want to waste other people's time. But most importantly, I didn't want to waste my time, because I had so much to do in that 8-9 hours during the day that I was dedicated to Disney, that I'm like, I can't take stuff home with me. I can't go to nights and weekends thinking Disney. I got this other thing that I got to think about. So how do I make decisions right away? How do I give directions right away? How do I delegate very clearly so that I can be off, do what I want to do? Obviously, at the time, being single and no kids was helpful because with kids, it'll be very difficult to try to mirror the schedule that I had back then. Sure. But not that you can't say that it's impossible. Yeah, that's itself as a side project. Or maybe actually the kids are a main project. Your job is
exactly. That's fair. And I think too, at different points of our lives, it's like, we're able to jump into things differently. But, there's definitely these other success stories out there where you hear about the folks who, what they do is they get up at 4 a.m. in the morning so they could do that side hustle so that they could then be there when their kids get up, and then work on the main hustle if it's the kids and then the career, itself, which is impressive. I was going to ask you a question. Oh, sorry. Were you going to say something else?
I was going to say, the other benefit of kind of pursuing a side project, I would say in this really odd way, is mental kind of wellness, because you are so focused on this thing that the frustrations and burnout or anything that's happening at your main job just doesn't get to you as much. So you come across as more happy, as more engaged. You might not be, but because it's not in your head constantly kind of gnawing at you and you starting to compare everything, you just come across more happy and enjoyable to be around, which then makes you a better teammate and better person to network with. So it just, there's this huge compounding effect of pursuing something on the side, and obviously being very genuine about your main job too. Not to say all of a sudden you're going to forget about your responsibilities you're being paid for. That's not what I'm advocating at all. You need to give it your best at both. But when you do, really interesting things happen.
Yeah. It's funny in the future, definitely one of the topics I want to dive into is this whole quiet quitting and all of that side of things too. But one of the things too, I was going to ask a question about, what some things are that you attribute to your success in corporate America, but instead I'm going to try to repeat back because I actually think we've already touched on them, but I want them to be really clear for anybody watching this. So one of those you just mentioned was that sort of mental well-being that actually comes with pursuing something that you're passionate about, that then, helps to ignite even more of this sort of energy and stuff from you. The other is you mentioned a team and really having a good team, but also fostering a good team and making sure that they understand, they're ultimately, you're here to coach and help them along the way, but you really are empowering them, which, by the way, it reminds me, you also at one point had some YMCA coaching you were doing through all this, which is another crazy.
Oh, yeah. I was coaching 12 and 13-year-old kids at YMCA basketball. That was an amazing story because I got asked to do this from a high school friend that was the athletic director at the YMCA. I thought, why not? This sounds interesting. I was given a team that had not won a game the season prior. And the seasons were 10 games long, so they went 0-10. When I took over, and the seasons were basically every quarter, so there was a summer season, spring season, fall, winter. So they played 4 seasons every year. So I coached 1 year. We won the championship all 4 seasons.
It's amazing.
When I decided that I don't have the time to dedicate to this, the parents showered me with so many gifts for me to stay, because I think they saw a difference in their kids too, of how motivated they were, and they were wanting to play, and the winning was obviously helping. Winning always helps. I'm definitely not a fan of just getting a trophy, winning. But that was a fun experience. And to me, that I use a lot of my corporate and side project team building leadership methodologies and philosophies. I apply it to the kids. And then because I know basketball so well, I dumbed down basketball strategies to 12-year-olds, and it worked brilliantly. So I can't wait till my son is that age. My wife asked me, "You want to coach Eric now?" I'm like, "Oh, no. I need them to listen to me, right? I can't have 4 or 5-year-olds just running around. That'll drive me crazy." But once he's 10, 11, 12, I'm definitely coaching him.
And that's fair. You could say that too from experience, because you tried to help me play basketball and you couldn't do it. I just wasn't going to meet your expectations. But
I remember you just said that. I remember we were working on something, and we decided to take a day and go to Laguna Beach, and at the Starbucks that faces the beach, and right in front of that there's this outdoor basketball. I'm like, "Oh, let's take a break and go over there." And we were there, and these 2 young kids come, and they're like, "Oh, you guys want to play 2-on-2?" And they were kind of showing off, and I was not even in basketball clothes. I'm like, "Sure, why not?" I think we played up to 11. I think I beat them 11 to like 2.
Yeah.
You were just a decoy.
That's fair. It's totally it. Like, the secret is, if anybody ever plays with me, just leave me wide open, because the shot's not going to go in. I can defend. I could stand in the way, and I'll use my height to my advantage. But yeah, that was it. Yeah. And I think I was sore after that. Like I was sore for I don't know how long. But anyway, so back, we got the mental well-being side of it. We have basically just the leadership and growing a team. Where you again foster that sort of independence and their ability to make decisions and just being empowered. Then you also mentioned obviously the idea of growing these other skills, which you did through this side hustle. I'm just going to call it, even though again we could argue what we want to say, but even though arguably you didn't know there'd be any payoff there, but there was actually a big payoff in your work, because those skills and stuff made you stand out. And then let's see, I think you said one other thing there. Oh, and then just around just the time management component, as you had to start looking about how you get better because you were juggling all those. And those are all pretty critical, but I'm curious, is there anything else you'd want to add to that you'd attribute to your success in corporate America?
No, I would say that's it. And the only thing I would add is, going back to high school, I was always growth minded. I started reading like Tony Robbins material in high school. So I think that mindset definitely helped.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing I would add. I think having that mindset of growth, and I'm just programmed, I'm wired to never think of really failure as failure. Because of that growth mindset, I thought of growth as learning. And if it failed, I learned. And it was like, okay, well, that first project didn't work out, but I learned that here's how we should do it the next time. And, Michael and I had several software ideas in the beginning that just didn't go anywhere. But what I learned through that was great. And I never even looked back at the time and the money that I might have put up for those failed projects. Never once I considered it. It was like, okay, let's move on to the next one. And I think that helps to success anywhere, I think, to have that type of mindset instead of failing and then going in the shell and not trying again.
100%. And I think, when you consider that too, oftentimes people are hesitant. And I feel like so many people that I've worked with, like, initially to even spend money after college on education, for some is just odd. In fact, some people leave that to their corporate, HR and their bosses to educate. Like, I remember some of the team and stuff like that, when I'd be like, you and I were individuals who were like, we'll pay our own way to go to places like NAB and other things, because we just saw that as a chance to learn and grow. And some people see it as, well, you need to, pay for me to do that. But you said something that one of my, favorite quotes attributes similar to what you said, which is, sometimes you win and sometimes you learn. And I think adopting that mindset is so important. You don't lose unless you fail to learn, a lesson from it as well. So
I call it Mamba mentality.
There you go. Exactly. No, that's fair. as far as, and I think we've got a little bit of us out of here, but your book itself, you touched on that, but I'm curious what led you to want to write that book, and like, what was the inspiration ultimately around it?
It was always a bucket list item to write a book, but I just never knew what to write about. And not only the what, but why do I even want to write a book? And as kind of I got older and kind of a little wiser, I started becoming very self-reflective of life. Like, why are we even here? And, those type of philosophical questions that sometimes you can go down a rabbit hole and then come out of it and, want to kill yourself. You're like, what am I doing here? But what I started doing 10 plus years ago was visualizing myself when I'm 90 years old and saying to myself, okay, I'm on my deathbed, hopefully 90 or even more. What am I going to be proud of? And that question was a very important and deep question that I continue to ask myself. And when I say what I'm going to be proud of, and I look back, never once the answer was this project, this crazy project at my side project, or the fact that I was a key contributor to the integration of the Fox and Disney acquisition. Like, none of those big things came to mind. What always came to mind was, I'm going to be proud of that I was a good husband, an amazing dad, and that I helped people. So once I was clear that I want to cover those things so I don't have the regrets when I'm on my deathbed, I started thinking, well, how do I help people? And at the same time, I started getting a lot of questions around, well, I have an idea. How do I bring this idea to life? And, well, I have a job too. Well, how'd you do this? And all of a sudden, people were flooding me with questions. And then I got invited to speak about these topics. I'm like, oh, this is how I can finally fulfill my destiny of helping people. And I initially, like, well, I should kind of create content. But then I'm like, no, my bucket list item is a book. Let me write that book. And then in the future, I might do something else with that book. But that's what I want the book to be, is how do I help people that the people that were in my shoes when I was 25, have ideas, are ambitious, motivated, but don't come from a wealthy family, are not connected to Harvard, Stanford, MIT. They just have an idea, but they don't know where to go about it. I'm like, that's who I wanted to help. And as I started writing the book, slowly the core message of the book started to come out too, because it was all about, you're one idea away from happiness. No matter what that happiness is you're just one idea away. It could be that you tried the side thing and it doesn't work out. But you realize that, hey, I'm working in marketing right now, but I actually loved product. So you're going to try to pivot yourself into a product career. And that's what makes you happy. Like, to me, that was the worst case scenario, is happiness that way. Or it's you find happiness through a side project, but it's just one idea away. It could be 10 failures, but then you're still one idea away. And that kind of became the core message of the book. And then now, obviously, you and I are trying to reach out and help at a greater capacity. And the book is being converted into an online course where it's going to be, diving deeper into the topics with more specific how-tos, instead of kind of books are usually at that 10, 15,000, maybe 30,000 foot level. Online courses really get you to be in the weeds. And that's kind of the next step in the process of trying to be, when I'm in my deathbed, to look back and say, I help people. And that's kind of one of my means to achieve that.
That's awesome. I love it. Related to that one, actually, what advice would you actually give to, aspiring entrepreneurs who are looking at maybe doing something similar, or whether it's a side hustle at their corporate job or in general, just looking to build out a business? What advice would you give them?
Just start. don't don't get discouraged that you don't know how to do it. Just start. And the information is out there. When my online course is available, that's one source, but there's hundreds of similar type of sources out there. Just start and just figure it out. If you're resourceful enough, you'll figure it out. I'm a huge Nike fan, so I kind of always go by just do it. I live by that. So just start. Don't procrastinate. Don't wait for that perfect moment, because there will never be a perfect moment. Don't wait until you get that job that gives you more money. Just follow a thoughtful process that positions you to just do it, and then go for it. And if it doesn't happen, you've learned, you can apply it again.
Totally with you. And look, I'll admit, it's like there's days today where, look, this podcast is that example. We're like, let's do it, because it's so easy to always come up with a reason why, or it's not perfect, or this or that. So I love that. And I'll admit, sometimes you have to tuck me off my own ledge when I'm like, we get into those modes where it's like you want to make everything perfect. And the reality is you're going to learn so much more by just starting. Now,
I think what happens usually, which is not a bad mindset, but you have to check yourself. As a unproven entrepreneur, you kind of automatically come up with an idea and think it's going to be huge. So then in your mind, you are trying to build something that's ready for scale. But the reality is that when you first build something, a company, a product, a course, or whatever, your audience is going to be small. So to try to make it perfect because you thought you're going to get thousands or tens of thousands flocking to you, it's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. But I think people tend to strive for perfection because they're thinking that, oh my God, if this is going to be great, then it better be perfect. But that's not the reality. So just put it out there, because your small initial core fans and listeners, users, whatever you want to call them, are actually going to help it make it perfect in a better way than you could have ever made it perfect in your own bubble.
No, I think that's great and really important, because, I admit sometimes I struggle from going from, call it 0 to Fortune 500 company in like 4 seconds flat, which is fine. You want to think about that vision, but then when it comes to the action, you got to think about the immediate steps and what you need to take. And like we can look at companies, and just a couple that come to mind is like Twitter and Instagram. They weren't Twitter and Instagram when they started. They went down completely different pathways. And I think there are so many others that we could say that way. I mean, heck, even, Social Nightlife started off with a slightly different life, which, by the way, could have gone on, though, maybe to be OnlyFans, who's to say? But
sure was that.
But I think that's that's how you understand and learn more. And just like, in our last episode, you had mentioned to me about my, target audience, if you will, or those. And it's like, well, we'll see if that sticks, but the only way to know it is to get out there and start, exploring, getting the feedback, and then decide what you have, because you may decide it takes you down another path. And on that, actually, you said something else that I also think was important. That is another benefit of people who are actually pursuing something while they are in their, regular full-time gig, is you said about, like, maybe they want to get over to product, and they're, in, I forget what example you gave the department, but what happens is people go from high school to college. And sometimes even now, a question that comes up a lot is people are like, well, what should I do for a career? And it's like, it's hard to answer that question. People out there might say, well, just follow your passion. Or others might say, look, I know in Armenian culture, I remember, birthday for your son, was they have, the tradition where they pick a different thing that's in front of them around what they're going to do when they grow up.
That's
like
a teething. That was a teething.
Teething. That's what it is. Okay. And because, and even in that case, though, of course, a lot of the things that a lot of us think about, and I know my parents put out there, it's like, oh, lawyer, doctor, we think about all of these things. And, I'm sure people are all thinking about what that should look like in the future of AI, now in general. But what happens is sometimes by the time somebody makes that decision in college is they don't actually know for sure what they want. They're choosing something that others might have suggested to them was like a good way to go. So it's only through that self-discovery that you really figure it out. And sometimes people in college might even figure out it's not what they want, but they're already committed to it. And it's that sunk cost fallacy where now they're like, well, I should stick with this. And I think by doing these things on the side, you're still able to explore. I won't call it being a kid, but that exploration side of it might actually unlock what you really want to do in life, even if that still remains in a corporate setting or whatever that is. But now you realize, no wonder I wasn't so happy. I shouldn't have been in operations. I should have been in human resources because I like this side of it, or I should have been in product or, anyway, some other element. So I think that's another huge benefit.
I mean, when you kind of are, get into a role, you have to think about that when you're in an entry level position. It's much easier to bounce from one function or one discipline to another. As you go up the ladder, it becomes harder for two reasons. One, the availability of those higher manager and executive roles decrease, and you start making more money. So all of a sudden, you could find yourself stuck. And I'm just making it up, call it marketing. You're stuck in marketing, but you don't feel like that's your calling. But if you had done stuff on the side and explored it, you definitely could have figured out what you want to do. Yeah, that's it. That's kind of my background. I think that's it for episode 2. So please, like, share, subscribe, whatever platform you're on, and continue listening. And if you have any suggestions and topics you want us to talk about, please let us know, because we would love to explore those topics as well. And then just, soon to come episode 3. All right. Thanks all. Bye.